The next question is from Dr. Ibrahim Al-Mujal.
Ah, yes, Abraham.
Could you share some general advice and some lessons learned on parenting?
Lessons on parenting is very interesting. That, as I've said many times, all children are raised by amateurs. That's just the way it goes. And what I've observed is that there's a lot more built in by nature than you might think. I would say that, except for the most extreme examples, your children are going to grow up anyway. And while you can give them direct them in ways that you think will be good for them, and you will, a lot of it would happen almost in spite of what you do. There are so many examples of people who were, really brought up in the most extreme ways. There was one of our senators just wrote a book on the kinds of abuses that he suffered as a child, or his mother ended up having many successive men in her life, some of whom would beat her, and he would end up in fights with them and so forth. And he said he'd moved 17 times in 18 years or something like this. And now, he's a fine person. And he just wrote this book to sort of get it off his chest. But it just shows that many people who wouldn't be as open as he is probably have had pretty challenging childhoods. Some of them can use that to motivate them to do great things for other people, and others might use it as an excuse to get into a life of crime. But generally, the parents have less to do with how the children are raised than nature does. So don't worry about it, Ephraim. They'll grow up anyway.
As a follow-up on that,
yeah.
Do you suggest any method, or do you have anything to share from how you dealt with your children?
Well, I dealt with my children pretty much as my parents dealt with me. And that is, they gave me tremendous freedom to try things. For example, when I was about 10 or so, my grade school friends would be smoking cigarettes and saying, let's go, behind the billboard here down the street to smoke some cigarettes. And I wasn't sure I wanted to do that, so I told my father, who was a smoker, I said, well, I'd like to smoke. He said, okay, what do you want to smoke? And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, a pipe, because that looks more interesting than cigarettes. So he said, okay, what pipe do you want? And he got me a pipe and tobacco and so on. So now when these kids were saying, let's go smoke, I said, well, I could just light my own. But, it's kind of interesting. Smoking a pipe looks great, but it doesn't taste that good. So I had the pipe, but I had pretty much stale tobacco and never got an interest in smoking. Later, when I was in high school, as a freshman, and so I had friends who were drinking, and they'd go out and beer and all this, and so I said, Mother, Dad, I want to drink. And my father said, okay, well, what do you want to drink? And I had heard of this particular kind of very sweet whiskey, so I said, this kind. He said, okay, I'll get you a bottle. And so I had this bottle in my room, and I'd take a little bit out of it and taste it, but that was it. And there's one, and they said, okay, anytime you're doing okay in school, you just ask you to get another bottle. Well, one lasted me, a year, and so I never got a taste for drinking and no matter how much my friends were saying, let's go out and do this. Well, what's the point? If I wanted to get drunk, I could do it in my room at home. And that's exactly the way I raised my children. Now, I didn't smoke. We had lots of liquor in the house because I would like to try different things, brandy from France and all that. But we didn't drink. We didn't drink it. But when they got to be teenagers, they'd say, well, we're thinking of going out to this party. I said, okay, just don't drink there. If you want to drink, drink here. And to my knowledge, that's what they did. Now, when they got out of college, we had a meeting about drugs, which is another thing that parents are concerned about. And one of my children said, I asked them, have they tried drugs? And they said, well, we've known since middle school, if not which of the people we knew would have drugs, who we'd ask of those people, who would know somebody. So there was never, you couldn't get drugs if you wanted them. And one of them said, when I got to college, I remember I tried cocaine once, and it was pleasant, but it was very expensive, and I realized I'd have to choose between that and my motorcycle, and I decided on the motorcycle. So instead of raising your children like, if you do this, it's going to be terrible and so forth, you want them to know the consequences of it, like driving drunk and so forth. But telling people they can't do something is like telling them not to think of pink elephants. Then all of a sudden that will play a very large part in their thinking. So that once you've dealt with, I'm not going to expect you to do what I tell you, but what makes sense for you, then life seems to go on and they can devote their attention to things that they really want to do.
So the cocaine story was about your children?
Yeah, one of my sons. Okay. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And could you share, I know once you've shared the story about how your daughter got the motivation to be an engineer.
Well, I'm not how she got motivation to be an engineer, but I think this was an early example of treating people the same, regardless of whether men or women. So when she was 9 or 10, she had a bicycle, and she said, Daddy, I've got a flat tire on my bicycle. And I said, I see. And she was kind of looking at me like I ought to do something. And I said, I guess you'd like that fixed. Yes. Well, why don't I show you how to do it? And so she learned how to fix the flat tires on her bicycle. It wasn't something her brothers would do or I would do. And many years later, when they were in high school and a little beyond, we had a very interesting day here at Stanford, which was sponsored by one of the mechanical engineering professors, and it was called The Joy of Fixing. And what the deal was, in the morning, alumni particularly, would come to Stanford and have lectures on, how not to be afraid of trying to fix something and whatnot. That was well received. And then in the afternoon, we had kind of a fix-it fair where people could, typically faculty members would have exhibits and things of their fix-it interests, and then the alumni would come and see how to do this. Well, in our family, we were heavily into vehicles, so we would fix everything from 3-speed hubs on bicycles to rebuilding truck engines and motorcycles in the middle. And so we had this place where we were dealing with people, and they could ask questions. And I remember one Stanford alumna, a woman, who had small children, but I think her husband was taking care of the children, and she had her bicycle, and she said, I'm unhappy with, I don't know how to fix this bicycle, I don't know how to adjust the brakes and all of that, and I don't want to have to ask somebody. So my youngest said, well, okay, here's how you do it, and show her exactly how to do it. And she literally leapt with joy at having this ability now to handle it herself instead of having asked somebody. So it's important for people to have this feeling of, I can really do it, I don't have to ask somebody, and yet to know when it's the right time to ask. I don't believe in do-it-yourself brain surgery, but for many other tasks we're certainly able to do it ourselves.
Okay. A follow-up on the parenting question.
Yes.
Sometimes parents will have very different opinions about their children's life choices.
Absolutely.
And for instance, I have a friend who asked me, who's very unhappy about the people her daughter hangs out with, and she feels that her daughter is not settling down and not taking responsibility or not really going in the right direction. She's making herself very unhappy about this.
The mother is.
The mother is.
Yeah.
So what would you advise parents who take a lot of grief on account of their children's life choices?
Well, there's many levels to think about that, but one I always liked was the poem by Khalil Gibran, which talks about the metaphor of children, parents, and bows and arrows. He said that the parents are the bow that is required to fire off the arrow, which is the children. In other words, very hard for a child to get anywhere without the parents. On the other hand, the bow cannot go where the arrow goes. In other words, the arrow is on its own once it's launched. And while you can give children advice, there's got to be some reason for them to follow that advice, other than making my mother unhappy or something like that. So the first question is, what is it in this relationship with these friends of hers that makes the daughter satisfied with that? You know, I remember when I was in high school, we all knew who were the kids who were serious about education and concerned about their future, and the others who were goofing off and seemed to have no long-run plans and whatnot. And you kind of naturally gravitated toward the people you felt comfortable with, one or the other. But it wasn't because your parents told you to do that. It was because you could see that these were the people who shared with you the kinds of future that you would like to have and had thought about it. And that's perhaps the most important thing, to have people understand that at all ages that they're responsible for their own lives. So when my kids were small, we never had a bedtime. And I remember and sometimes they would stay. I remember one occasion they really wanted to stay up very late. So they stayed up very late, and the next day they were very sleepy at school, and they were not happy with that. I mean, they had all kinds of trouble getting up. Well, you know, the penalty that they faced then is the same penalty I face now. If I stay up all night, I'm going to not be worth much tomorrow. So I could say, look, you've got to get to bed early to get your sleep, or let them realize what it's going to be like if they don't get their sleep, which is the rules we all live under, like gravity. So the more they realize it's not the parental requirement that they do something, and more that it's in their self-interest, the better.
So in a sense, what you're saying also applies to spouses or any kind of relationship we have.
Absolutely.
There's no difference between children.
No, it's just person to person. And, you know, and children to parents, I mean, as well as parents to children. Yeah. I'm not a big believer in obligation. Maybe that's a fault of mine, but whenever I do something out of obligation, it's as if I didn't really choose to do it. And I want to live a life where I choose to do what I do. No have-tos. Now, I may choose to do things that are very helpful to other people, but I'm still choosing to do them. I don't have to do them. And just realizing you have the freedom to live your own life then allows you to live it in any way you like, including one that may be of great service to others. But it's really living the life that's the right life for you. I had an earlier conversation today with a student in the class whose I think it was a grandmother is thinking about retiring and very concerned about she doesn't like her job, and yet she's worried about the money and all that. Well, there's one thing she can be pretty sure of, is that she doesn't like going to work every day. And so the real question is, how do you want to live your life? It's not when you should retire, but what do you want to look back on and live tomorrow so that you'll have no regrets about it? So living a life of no regrets is perhaps a more important thing than a life of rules about what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. Maybe you should drop out and go to another country and help the poor. Maybe you should just get a better job or start your own business. But there's really no point in complaining about your situation or thinking about improving it in small ways. Because your life is yours to live or to waste as you choose fit. Choose to see.